Hi, welcome to another episode of Sipping with Simone. I have so many things to do tomorrow, and that's why I'm like, let me boil myself a cup of chamomile tea. It says I woke up like this, but it's actually nighttime while I'm filming this video, so yeah, I didn't quite wake up like this. In fact, so from the last video, if you saw, on nail biting and hair pulling, I had my hair out and I said that I would condition my hair, and now I have my hair conditioned. One would think that I would remove the towel from my hair and actually like do my hair before getting on YouTube and, you know, showing my face to the whole entire world. But because I have no shame and I don't care, I am just sitting in front of you on this camera with my head in a towel. I typically try to put myself together before this time, but you know, I've come to the point where if I'm going to produce content and if I'm going to like be doing videos and uploading them like on a regular basis, I can't wait till I have it all together. I'm sorry. I even tried to go to Sephora yesterday to get foundation, but they ran out of my color 480, so I'm waiting for it. So all that to say, hopefully next week or in the next few days, I'll be okay. This is why I'm single. Speaking about singleness, right? We talk about why am I single? I'm single because I go on YouTube with a towel on my head. Who knows? Who knows? Who knows anymore why people are single and what's happening? So if you subscribe to my channel, and I hope you subscribe to my channel. If you don't, here's a chance like right now to subscribe. If you subscribe to my channel, sorry, I was just eating chicken. If you subscribe to my channel, you will know that I have been doing videos, or rather I am doing videos, on this book, Party of One, Truth, Longing, and the Subtle Art of Singleness by Joy Beth Smith. I purpose and I endeavor to do a video on each chapter in this book, because she says a lot of things in here, and I have a lot to say. This singleness has inadvertently, because I didn't aspire to this growing up, singleness has inadvertently become, I wouldn't say a passion, but definitely something on which I have lots to say. I have, in some respects, become an expert on being single. I believe I have singleness down to an art, to a science. And so anytime a book comes out and they are not bashing singles or telling single people like me of the many different ways I am flawed or things I must be doing wrong and things I have to do otherwise, anytime a book actually comes out with some affirmation and common sense and confirmation and consolation, I take notice. And so that's what this book is to me. So I did chapter 1 already. I thought that I would do chapters 2 and 3 together in terms of my thoughts, because I didn't really have enough thoughts, or didn't see a reason to just do chapter 2 all by itself. So chapter 2 is Singleness Isn't Seasonal. And in it, Joy Beth talks about how a lot of times we view, and rather the church also preaches, that singleness is a season to be endured, and you just get over it so that you can go to the promised land, which is marriage and hot sex and babies, and wonderfulness, and promised land and New Jerusalem. But instead, she's trying to drive home the point that singleness is not a season. It's not something to endure. It's not something just to get over. It's something to be celebrated, and it's something to, it's valid. It's a valid, not even life stage. It's just valid life, not even part of life. Singleness is people's lives, and will be, for some people, the only life that they know. And so that needs to be affirmed. So, like I said in my last video, I largely don't disagree with what she has to say. Although I will say that I have always viewed singleness as a season, but not as a season necessarily to get over, or that needs to be completed. So I view singleness as a season Can't talk. I have viewed singleness as a season in the sense that, okay, well, she quotes Ecclesiastes at the start. Ecclesiastes 3 verse 1. For everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven. So I viewed singleness as like, this is a season. And in my mind, seasons are not necessarily definite. Sometimes seasons could be infinite. You know, so in my mind, I had hope. My hope is for myself and for other people desiring marriage. That singleness is just a season. It's the winter of one's life. I'm kidding. It's a season. It's a time period that'll soon, hopefully sooner than later, transition into another period. As I have gotten older and gained wisdom and knowledge and enlightenment and insight, I've come to the conclusion that not only is singleness for some people a finite season, but singleness could be a season even if it lasts one's whole life, right? If we look at meteorology and we look at places like the Sahara Desert or Jamaica, like there are some places arguably, because it's hot all the time, you can't say that there are seasons there. But you could also say for those same places that, yes, there's seasons. It's a rainy season and a tropical season and a warm season and a dry season. And, you know, so I don't think we should get hung up on semantics. I think the key point here, and what I agree with Joy Beth on, is that singleness is not something to be endured. It's something to be enjoyed and celebrated, and it's valid and should be affirmed by everyone. And she quotes 1 Corinthians 7, 8-9, which is a chapter that anytime the church or Christians talk about singleness, we always have to go back to Paul, 1 Corinthians 7. And she has an interpretation of 1 Corinthians 7 similar to mine, which is, I think Paul was looking at the church and looking at people and how they were doing with being single. And I think he just saw them like really struggling. I think he probably saw some of them being single and telling people that being single is better than being married. I think he saw probably some married people telling the single people, you know, being married is better, so you guys need to like get married. I think he saw some single people struggling sexually and falling into sexual sin, fornication, adultery. And so I think Paul was just trying to give some wisdom to the early church and just say, you know what, guys, okay, you could be married or you could be single. Being married is not better than being single, and being single is not better than being married. They are both valid in God's eyes. They are both valid, necessary, important lives, not even something to be endured. One does not necessarily lead to the next. One is not necessarily promised to the other, but they are both valid. And then he says, for those who are single and God has called you to, well, for those who are single and you know that you're struggling sexually, perhaps you should consider marriage so that you won't burn with passion, so that you won't struggle sexually. So he wasn't elevating marriage. He was just saying they're both valid, but y'all, if you're struggling, and I see that you are, get married. Because then there will be a place for that struggle. One should hope that marriage will help extinguish some of that fire, or at least help, not quell, but manage it. I think that's what he was saying. But the church, oh, the church. How I love the church. The church, as it often does with the Bible, has taken that and just ran with it into another direction. And in many churches, I can only speak on behalf of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Well, I don't speak on behalf. I am a member of it. So I can only speak from the perspective of being a Seventh-day Adventist. But many Protestant churches, just I guess Christendom in general, has taken what Paul has said and been like, no, marriage is better. Because marriage is a crucible. And marriage, in marriage, you get to see an example of the love that Christ has for the church. And in marriage, you get to see an example of the love that Christ has for the church in terms of husband and wife, but in terms of father and children. And marriage gives you a glimpse, a foretaste of heaven on earth. And so the church has like ran with that and just been like, we don't know what singleness shows you, but that's what marriage shows you. And then some other denominations have taken it the other way to be like, no, you need to be single to be a pastor or a priest, because you need to be single-minded and you need to be devoted to what's happening. And then, so this is what's happened. And then basically everybody's gotten screwed over, because you have priests who are really struggling sexually, not only in, I'm not going to mention any particular church, but not only in the church that we're all thinking of, but also like really in all denominations. A lot of single pastors are struggling. And then you have married people who are miserable, and probably some of them would be better off divorced. And their marriage has shown them anything but the love of Christ. Their marriage is not an example of Christ's love for the church and Christ's love for humankind. I think the church has gotten some things a little messed up, and I think that's what Joy Beth is trying to say here. She says that singleness is not a waiting room or holding cell. It's not temporal by design, and it doesn't exist only to usher you into something greater. Singleness is a valid life stage, one in which you can experience as much joy, spiritual growth, and fulfillment as any married person. She also mentions a lady named Shirty, who's a 34-year-old dentist from Nashville, who mentioned in the round table that Joy Beth had been holding. This dentist said that no one knows how to minister to singles. No one affirms that this phase of life is okay. And that's another thing. A lot of people just look at singleness as a problem. And largely many singles, we look at singleness as a problem, but I think a lot of that is us feeding into everybody else looking at it as a problem, right? If we lived in a society where it's like, oh, you're single? Oh, what are you having for breakfast? If we lived in a society like that, then I don't think being single would be so hard. She says, why isn't anyone saying this is what it's like to walk as a single woman? It's a hole that the church doesn't know how to fulfill or to fill. Covered that. Paul was obsessed with being single and doing him. That's great for Paul, and there are still people like that. But that doesn't make it a mandate for us to be single. We keep going back to this verse because he was the only one in the Bible talking about it. Oh, and here's another good point. A lot of people look at singleness as like, okay, you could be single, that's fine, but unless you're doing something with your singleness, you really should get married. As if, unless you are ascending to Mother Teresa Gandhian heights and you're like going on missions and living for the poor and living barefoot and eating beans and crackers and sending all your money to international aid organizations and adopting children and, volunteering in Sabbath school and Sunday school and going to prayer meeting, unless you're doing all those things, then you're wasting your singleness. So this idea that, okay, be single, but you need to be doing all these things for it to be a valid life stage. And that is not the case. She ends the chapter by saying, what if singleness is all there is for you? And that's the thing. That's the hard pill that I am challenging myself to swallow. Mind you, I haven't given up on getting married. Anything could happen. Donald Trump is president. Anything can happen. anything can happen. I believe this. I believe that. And I'm not old. I'm 30. Reasonably good looking. I think I'm smart. I think I'm pretty. Definitely have a great personality. I have a lot going for me. So I don't necessarily, I hope, when I'm doing these videos, I'm not saying, oh, woe is me, I'm never going to get married. But it would be disingenuous for me not to acknowledge that I may not ever get married, despite of all my wonderful qualities, if I'm going to be honest with myself, cannot just exist in this hopeful fantasy realm, but I'm going to have to somehow, at least I'm contending with somehow the possibility of I may never get married. I may never get married. I may never get married, and I may always be alone, and may always have to spend God forbid, the 50 years ahead of me. 50, 60, people live until 100. I have another 60 years by myself. I might have to do that by myself, and there might not be any partner to come alongside, and I may not have to worry about being unequally yoked because there is no one to whom I can yoke myself. I have to also realize that. And so if this is all there is, I've challenged myself, and I think other singles should challenge themselves to be like, then what? Then what are you going to do? Do you hold off on things? How are you going to live if a partner is not part of the picture? And for me, that has meant, as the next chapter will allude to, finding joy apart from being in a partnership. So the next chapter is chapter 3. Marriage can't be the greatest source of joy. And I think the reason why she wrote this chapter is a lot of us have been told and subsequently believed that once we get married, we'll be happier. Everything will be much better. And I certainly think to myself from time to time, if I were married, I could be happier or things would be easier. I have a pile of laundry on my sofa right there. You can't see it because I have very carefully cut it out of this viewing area. I have a pile of laundry over there, and I've thought to myself, if I were married, if I had a partner, then while I'm cooking, somebody could be doing the laundry, or while I'm at work, if he gets home earlier than me, he could stop by Loblaws, which is a grocery store in Canada, stop by Loblaws and pick up a rotisserie chicken. So, at least we could get dinner started. I've thought to myself, what happens if I own a car? I don't know how to change a flat tire. I've thought to myself, things are so much more fun when you have somebody else to do it with, and not just a friend to do it with, but an intimate partner, somebody who knows you very well. Then one would think that the joys would be multiplied. So I think that's part of the appeal for people who want to get married. But I've also had to realize, and I don't know how I came to this conclusion, but I think I'm right. And I've had to realize that marriage is not going to guarantee joy. And in fact, for many people, marriage has been the straightest path to hell. Marriage has been the key to hell on earth for many people. I have listened to enough podcasts and spoken to enough married and divorced individuals, and watched enough YouTube videos and read enough books just to realize that a lot of people are very deeply unhappy in their marriage. I've also read a study, can't remember what study it was, but I know that this is a legit study and I'm not making this up, that for many people, marriage only gives a little blip in happiness, but then they return back to the same baseline of happiness that they were at before they got married. So marriage doesn't make you happy. And I've always thought to myself, of course, when I get married, there will be those moments in the morning where I'll turn to my husband and I'll be like, I never knew you existed. I didn't think you were real. I'm so happy. But other than that, after the rose-colored glasses come off, after the love is gone, as Earth, Wind, and Fire sings, after the honeymoon phase, again, I'm going to have to be faced with the then what of my life. I still have to have a career. I still have to be healthy. I still have to plan for retirement. Marriage doesn't solve any problems. So, I'm glad she wrote this chapter. Okay, so what is she saying? She says, I highlighted something here. What did she say? When someone tells me how great I'd be how I'd be great at being a wife or mom, it invalidates what I'm going through right now that feels valuable and life-giving. And those are things that don't depend on a man or children. People don't seem to trust me when I say I'm content. There's nothing wrong with that desire or hope, but you can't stake your life's fulfillment on a happy marriage. I just want to bring everybody's attention to the point of validate. That's what people are looking for. That's what people are looking for. Just outside of even the singleness context, I've realized that people are just looking for validation. I've realized that I am most effective in negotiating with somebody and making them hear my side if I at least validate and acknowledge their side first. So when we talk to people and when they have an argument, and I've always found it helpful to say, I understand what you're saying, I hear what you're saying, and if I'm correct, you're saying such and such and such. What I'm saying is such and such and such. I find that that disarms them. I find that that calms them. I find that most of the time that makes the other person, your interlocutor, open to hearing what you have to say. And I find that in terms of validation, when you validate what somebody's going through, when you validate somebody's pain, when you acknowledge somebody's hardship, I find that that's more of a balm to them than any other word of encouragement. When you say to somebody, it sounds like you're really hurt. Wow, I could tell that this is really bothering you. Or let's even more specifically, you are doing a great job at what you're doing. You're living a wonderful life, even though you're single. You have a great single life. You're doing the right thing. There's nothing wrong with you. You have no flaws. You're inspiring. You're amazing. When we say stuff like that, just validate the spot in which we find ourselves, because for many of us, we didn't bring singleness upon us. When people do that, that empowers us beyond anything else you could say, right? Even if you never talked about online dating, or if you never mentioned, your cross-eyed cousin who you'd like to set us up with, or if you never mentioned church hopping and how we should be visiting more churches so we could see more men, even if you never had any of those wonderful, helpful suggestions, just the fact that you validate how we feel, where we're at, and tell us that, maybe not even tell us that it's okay, but that we are seen, that it's valid, that's powerful. What else does she say? That's another thing that gets on my nerves. She says, but too often we end up having to do battle with loving friends and family members who insist we could be happier if only we found someone to spend our lives with. That infuriates me to no end. I remember one time I was talking to my aunt. She's really my cousin, but it's a long story. I call her my aunt. I shared with her that I thought I was depressed. At the time, I was like, I'm pretty sure I'm depressed. These are the things that are going on in my life. I'm really down. And the only words of kindness or encouragement she had for me was like, you need to find somebody. As if getting married would cure my depression. As if getting married would be an answer to all the things that were going on in my life at that time. I could tell you, in some ways, I want to think that having a partner would have been helpful during some of the more painful, difficult times in my life. But in other ways, I don't know if I feel comfortable bringing a man into any of that. And I don't know if he'd stay. And I don't know what kind of stress that would have put on the relationship. And truth be told, he couldn't solve anything. All he'd be able to